You know what's weird? Street Fighter does not have a Drunken Fist character yet. Well, actually, that's not fully true. They do have one, but they've never been playable before. So, we have to wonder, what would this character in this Drunken Fist style look like if Capcom put them into Street Fighter 6? And that's exactly what we talk about today on this episode of Talk and Block. Today, I want to talk about Drunken Fists, the martial art, the ancient Chinese art from way back in the day. There's a lot of representation of drunken fighting style in many modern fighting games and not so modern fighting games, but we haven't seen it in Street Fighter yet, and I think it's about time for that kind of a thing, and they're set up to do it. So before we get too far into it, though, and before we share all of our best Drunken Fist stories, I would like it if you guys could please, if you're not subscribed, we would really love it and appreciate it if you could subscribe. If you could, what do we say, Psycho Crush the like button, give us a comment or two for the algorithm, and let us know if you have a favorite Drunken Fist fighting style character in fighting games. And then also at the end of this, if you agree with some of the things that we say here or not. But yeah, and John, before we get too far in this, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm not drunk yet, but I'm hoping I will be drunk by the time we finish up here.
Well, sure. And you don't actually need to be drunk to do Drunken Fists, so we're not promoting any of that kind of stuff necessarily. But yeah, there is this...
John, you don't have to be, but I prefer to be, so that's kind of the difference.
Fair enough.
Drinking on the job. Let's go for it.
So there are a lot of, like I say, this fighting style representation in fighting games. You've got Brad Wong in Dead or Alive, Bo Raicho in Mortal Kombat, Lei Wulong in Tekken, Shun Di in Virtua Fighter, Chin in King of Fighters. People argue that there's not representation in Super Smash Bros. And technically you're right, but I believe there's an old unreleased Banjo-Kazooie game, kind of more in the style or in the spirit of Conker's Bad Fur Day, where they had actually formed a band and found the success of celebrity. Long story short, Kazooie starts to like Jin more than she likes maintaining the relationships with her closest friends and family, and it's a game about getting the band back together. So you could argue that Kazooie falls into that category as well, but in any case, there has been a lot of it, and it's a really captivating and I would say a very beautiful fight style that is super hype. It's really cool when you see people implement this, because it's like a rope-a-dope. You look so off balance, and yet it's actually a mastery of ability, and you just barely miss people, and then just come around and as if you didn't even intend to, and thwack them on the back of the head or whatever, or fall all the way down, but just to perfectly evade moves and such. And the people that do it really well, or even when it's implemented into characters, it looks really cool. And we'll have some footage of Jackie Chan, unless we can't have that footage of Jackie Chan. I'm pretty sure we can, and him doing it in movies and such. And man, maybe there are people that have done it better, but Jackie Chan is amazing at this kind of stuff.
Awesome. Yeah.
And he makes it look so beautiful. And so I see that and I go, Street Fighter 6 could really use this kind of a thing, and they already have a character in the Street Fighter franchise that practices the Drunken Fist style. And he is from Street Fighter 1. He's never been playable, except for if you there's like you can break Street Fighter 1 and play as the non-playable characters, but his name's Lee. And I want to talk about the potential for having Lee, or a character like him, but I think you would just use him as a Street Fighter 6 character, and then represent this really cool old ancient style. Lee is the uncle of Yun and Yang, so we know them really well. And they do the Baja Quan style, and Lee does that in Street Fighter 1, but it says that he's also practicing Drunken Fist, as well as getting his real estate license. And so Street Fighter 1 is first in the timeline, right? So there's no reason we couldn't say that he's been practicing and focusing on Drunken Fist style to wherever we get to in the timeline where Street Fighter 6 ends up. And that could be like the way that he fights. Do you have an opinion on this kind of style, though? Like, do you think it is particularly interesting? Do you think it's cool, or is it kind of just silly and dumb?
How is it not awesome? John has confidence in a bottle. Like there's no drawbacks to drinking when you're fighting. You know, it's not like you get wobbly or whatever and stuff like that. Just drink more, you get more powerful, you're good to go. Actually, with Shun Di, I actually played Virtua Fighter 2 quite a bit, and he was one of the characters I played a good amount. He just had certain moves that like you would do, and he would just pop open his sake and drink it, and it was like, and it was just great. It felt really fun and really rewarding. There was no real drawbacks for Shun Di because, you know, it's Virtual Fighter. The rounds end very quickly, right? But just being able to get that out, it's almost like you know, getting out like a power up or something like that. Like, you know, can you get a drink out and make it go? And I think that's a really fun mechanic in fighting games. And you know, and it's a really interesting style that we haven't seen in Street Fighter proper. So I love this idea if it's done well.
I think it could really lend itself to the esports spectacle because of how cool it is when it's implemented correctly, right? It looks like such a beautiful dance of just near misses and precision, and it's all under the guise of lack of control. Right? You'd expect someone that's drunken to have the least amount of precision, the least amount of control and balance. And so I think there's something really charming and captivating about that. And
yeah, and I mean, it's a sponsorship opportunity too, because you could give Lee like a Bud Light or something like that, and be like, all right, Bud Light, Budweiser, you're sponsoring
is that,
this one. Yeah, so
is that the theme we want of all the different types of alcohol that Lee could appreciate? It's Bud Light, not even Bud Light Lime. The classiest of fighters. Lee's in a dark place. Visiting Kazooie and Drippy Droppy Tavern or whatever it is. Yeah, I looked a little bit back onto the origins of the Drunken Fist fighting style, and what's kind of cool about it is that it has evolved, I dare say, alongside or even within Kung Fu as a broader fighting art, in a matter-of-fact way, and in seemingly in different places simultaneously. To say it's like it's something that's almost naturally occurring, and to me that sounds like, well, you know, you have all these people in China and such studying Kung Fu and practicing it, and they were also simultaneously, you know, drinking and exploring that, and the two things sort of just married in this way a whole bunch of different times over the years by different people. It's just something that, like I say, seemingly naturally occurred a couple of times. And there's like this kind of art, this grace to it. And so there are two major styles that emerged, the Buddhist and the Taoist version. And even within those, there are a handful of different origin stories or places that it might have come from. But I wanted to share one about the Buddhist side because I thought it was pretty cool. It is said that a famous martial artist named Li Kuizan accidentally killed a person and sought refuge in Shaolin to avoid trial and to repent. All right. So despite his monastic vows, he continued drinking wine. This was not tolerable by the monks, and they wanted to expel him from the temple. And while completely drunk, after consuming a huge amount of wine, he defied and beat the monks, some say more than 30 at once, which is pretty badass. The abbot, after seeing this, praised his skill, and then this drunken style of combat was adopted from him by the monks and refined over the generations. That's just one of the Buddhist stories. And one of the Taoist ones, the Taoist version focuses in on these 8 drunken immortal figures that all have different styles of, I don't know that they're even necessarily directly associated with alcohol. It sounds like they're more associated with like a preoccupation or like maybe even a faint lack of being ready, and then, like I say, that rope-a-dope, that kind of counter of, oh, you assume that I'm not ready, but actually I am, and twist it on you really quick and use your momentum against you and all that kind of thing. And there are a handful. One of them's name is Lee, and Lee, of these drunken immortals, Lee is a cripple who walks with an iron cane, feigns the weakness of having just one leg, and then wins the fight with his one powerful leg. And so there is an element of this, of like countering, you know, of you come in and again, I just barely miss you and then hit you with something else all in one fell swoop. And almost like I didn't even think to do it. It just sort of naturally happened. And so when I think about how this kind of fight style might be implemented into an esports Street Fighter game, I gotta wonder, there's a couple of ways they could go about it. It's actually fairly versatile. There are versions of it with weapons. There are versions of it without. There are versions of it that use like things that aren't weapons that are suddenly weapons, like flutes and musical, instruments. And so I gotta wonder. You brought up Shun Di in Virtua Fighter 5. He had a level up, at least in his Virtua Fighter 5 version, he had a level up system that had to do with drinking, right? And so every time he would take a drink out of his flask or whatever it was, he could do that. I think in the midst of combos, which was interesting,
Yeah,
or if you just
yeah.
gave him enough space, similar to like a charge up V skill in Street Fighter 5. And when he did that, he would gain more damage and then access to more moves and better hitting moves. And that's interesting. So it could be treated as a level up system, but you could also do it as like multiple stances. Maybe Lee goes back and forth between drunken style and Baji Kwan and you know and maybe something in between the two, similar to like you know Gen or Zeku. Or I thought another one might be it's straight up counters, right? And like that he would have a whole bunch of counter moves. So because I think that really lends itself to the style of fighting that Drunken Fist sort of just emerges as. But of those three,
Yeah.
do you have one that you kind of gravitate towards, or you think one of is going to be particularly rocky and dangerous to try to implement?
One of the things that I would actually, advise against for Capcom is like not having like a, where you get sick if you drink too much kind of thing. Like I would just kind of like put a cap on there where it's like you can only drink to a certain amount, because like it's your character falling over because they're too drunk or do something like that. Just kind of seems like probably not the best of images you would want in there. And so like I think as you're talking about the level up system, like when you fully max it or when you get to that point, like you just can't drink anymore and you're done. And your character is like still maybe more wobbly or their animation's a little bit more wild, to kind of symbolize it and stuff. I think it's going to be really important that it looks cool, but it doesn't look like you're just completely sloshed and whatnot, and your character basically can't fight. Like, because if you're kicking someone's butt and you're just like half on the ground or whatever, I don't think that's a good look for the game.
Yeah, and you'd want to implement it tastefully, sure, but and I don't even know that you would necessarily need a like alcohol present. It can just be a style that you're using where
Yep.
you're not
Yeah, that's
actually
true.
drunk, where your functions aren't actually being affected. It's just the style that you're doing it in. I'm really like the counters thing was something that popped into my head later after the first two ideas, and the counters are sort of dangerous because they become gimmicky really quickly. And maybe I'm a little bit biased because I played Gouken and Street Fighter 4, and I was using counters to anti-air because it worked pretty well. But I got yelled at a lot for doing that kind of a thing because if you can anti-air, you should anti-air with the surefire thing, not the counter, because maybe they empty jump in, things like that. Point is, people can start, and you see this a lot in Street Fighter 5 if you play it, especially against Ryu players. Not as much against Takuma, a decent a bit against Colleen's, and a lot against Gil, where people will kind of go gimmicky counter, and that can be really frustrating to play against because it's like there's a more solid way of playing. So this could be detrimental to the competitive spirit of the game. But I do think that they're super hype when they happen, and you could attach really cool animations similar to when Colleen does her EX counter in Street Fighter 5. There's like a little animation that plays out, and I would if you're a developer hone in on those animations, on little extras, playouts of movement where you really take the time to have them have them dance around each other, have the drunken character be elaborate and play out what they're going to do. I think that could be really fun and really hype. And if you capture that spirit of I can just see the audience popping off at the idea of the drunken character winning and just dancing around their opponent, just having their opponent's number, as is like what happens in a lot of the films and such where this style is highlighted and prominent. So I do think that there's a lot of potential.
Capcom should just take that footage of Jackie Chan fighting in that drunken style and try to replicate that in game as much as possible. Copyrights ignored, just freaking go for it. Let's go. Yeah.
So yeah, that's the gist of it all, and I'd like to hear from you guys if you think that it's time for a Drunken Fist fighting style to be part of the Street Fighter canon. Well, at least the playable Street Fighter canon. They want to represent styles from all over the world, and they sure have been, from Lucha Libre to that's the only one that I can think of right now. But that's Street Fighter is like Taekwondo from Korea and all the different kinds of martial arts that come out of China and Japan and such, and then the Western fighting and all this kind of stuff. But for whatever reason, they're the last ones to jump on the wagon of Drunken Fist, and I think it's about time to. So that's all I had to say about that.